Good evening, everyone,
Hello.
and welcome
Hi.
to Unsubscribe. Tonight, I'm joined with the gang.
Hello.
Most of us, anyway. We do actually have Charlotte in the studio. We're missing Jade and Eddie, but I think we've got a good representation with us tonight.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this.
Even a guest.
Yep, the pastor, the man of God. We have
Can
with
I
us.
thank you for having me tonight.
Yay.
I mean, I'm feeling a bit tired. It's getting late, but happy to be here.
Well, to kind of ruin the illusion, this is another pre-recorded episode. However, I think we probably said in all of our pre-records, we'll still be live on the comments on the night. So as we're going along, make sure, if there's anything you want to share, drop it in the comments. We'll try our best to respond to that. And also, even without us, it's always good that, everyone can have those discussions and encouragements and whatever it is in the comments.
Yeah.
So as always, we want to thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to join us. And today we are going to talk about politics.
Whoa.
Hey.
Social media.
It's all right, Kanal. I know what I'm doing. We're going to talk about politics, but before we do, let me show you the social media. So Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, and the website. So on Instagram, you can find us at unsubscribe_Bright City Church. Facebook, unsubscribe Bright City Church UK. Spotify, where you can find our playlists that we've been doing. Unsubscribe_Bright City Church. And then, as always, for all info anyway, you can find the info on the website, www.brightcitychurchuk.com. Is that right?
Thanks, man.
But yeah, that's where you can find us. That's where you can get in touch with us, and especially with the Spotify playlists as well. Not only can you discover music, but that's also something we're always interested in knowing. What's been speaking to you? What kind of worship songs have? Maybe not even worship. What sort of music, Christian based, have you been listening to that's really encouraged you recently? Let us know, because we're always looking for things to try and add to the playlist. So, without further ado, let's get into the topic. So, you've probably all heard it said. They say there's two things you should never speak about: religion and politics. We're going to talk about both tonight with one go, so we're breaking all the rules. But I wanted to, talk about this topic because I think it is something that is relevant to all of our lives. Jokes aside, it's something that we're usually encouraged to not speak about. And I don't think that necessarily changes as believers. I've noticed that, generally speaking, a lot of people are quite scared of talking about that topic or not interested in it. And I thought it would be a good one to discuss tonight and see, are there certain links between what goes on politically and our faith? So I want to start with, just a general kind of question before we get into the meat of the arguments, but it's about what got everyone interested in politics, or maybe you're not interested in politics, and that's still just as good to hear. So Sam, if I start with you, what would you say got you interested in politics, or what sort of your early memories of being interested?
As long as I can remember, I've been interested in politics. I don't think I could put my finger on anything particular, but I ended up going to university to study international politics and international relations. That came about more that I just didn't know what I was going to do when I finished school. And I knew I wanted to go to university, and I thought, well, I'm going to find something that's going to interest me for 3 years, like something that I'm going to stick out. So that's what I ended up doing, international politics.
Scholar on our hands.
We have the expert.
But that was a long time ago now. And
now you work in IT.
now I work in IT.
What does that say about politics?
Thanks, Sam. Ian, how about same question?
Yeah, I've, to be honest, not really been, a kind of political animal, if you like, growing up or even, and I think, certainly, I think in my, as a Christian, sort of, kind of ignored politics for a fair while. I think, more as I've grown up, and got a bit more mature, hopefully, I've realised that politics is about life and as I was thinking about, so I've had to get interested in it because,
Right.
it affects life hugely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so I've become more interested in recent years, I would say. And I think, because is it okay just to mention that,
Yeah.
as I was thinking about politics, it's sort of, we tend to sort of think, oh, it's discussing issues, let's say in life and stuff, and I suppose it is. But as I was thinking more deeply about it, really politics is kind of who's in charge.
Yeah.
If we think about it, it's who's running the things,
Yeah.
and so just an interesting kind of concept if you think about it in those terms. But so I do keep an eye on politics.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Tanya, I'll go around to yourself now. Where did your interest start in politics? Or maybe I'm making assumptions. Do you have an interest in politics?
I think it's been progressive. That is the short answer to that. I think that maybe as a young person, I didn't quite care for, unlike Sam, I didn't quite care for who's in the parties and what have you. But the older I got, the more I got interested because I realized whoever's in charge determines how things are run. And I thought to myself, well, I need to be well versed in this in order for me to make an informed decision. Also, when I went to uni, we'd have discussions about certain things, and it just, I suppose that's perhaps where my interest was sparked. And then also, my family are quite interested in politics. I mean, a lot of African people, we just talk about African politics because it's very dynamic and there's always something to talk about.
Right.
So I think there's elements of that made me interested. And also, I realized that God it doesn't shy away from politics. I'll just say that that's my own opinion. But we'll get to that. I don't want to tease too much. I'm just going to tease you guys.
No, thanks, Tanya. And then Kanoa.
Well, for me, it's a little bit like Ian. I've never really been like a political person, but
Political animal was.
Yeah, political animal. I was going to say freak, but but yeah, it's part of everything. I mean, as long as I can remember, I've always known about politics because it's on TV. There's like the presidents in France at school. We have mandatory teachings about citizenship and like all these kind of things that go around it. So
we're big deal in France.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we're quite well educated on it anyway. We do philosophy. So the French style of school kind of pushes you to have a minimum of interest anyway, because you learn about philosophy is quite linked to political views as well in lots of ways. Sure, so I've always been trained to think critically about things, and I think politics comes into that. And then obviously coming to a different country where things are very different, there's like interest in that. And then as growing up, growing older, I'm realizing all areas of life get affected by politics. We just put this big name on it, politics and politicians, but actually everyone is a part of it, whether you choose not to vote or you vote, you're very much part of the system.
No, thank you.
How about you?
I will get there. No, I'm joking. But what I wanted to share before I share my own story is I find really interesting is even just in our small group, there's so many, we just on all ends of the spectrum. Like from people like Sam, who's always been fairly interested in it, to like yourself and Tanya, who maybe have kind of over the years developed an interest. Kanel, it's almost more just a part of life. Like, how could you not know about politics? And maybe just want to, start by, that would kind of be something I would share to everyone, thanks Sam, is that I think when you say the word politics, it's like a scary word, isn't it? And I think because of how I would say we see politicians speak, it's so confusing that I think it's one of those things where you think, well, if I don't understand them, then I don't care about it. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And you don't have to be a scholar or an expert or super passionate about politics for it to be relevant or for you to have an interest. So for myself, I've got a very similar story to Sam, funny enough. So we actually studied the same subject at university. So I studied international relations pretty much for the same reason as Sam. I just didn't really know what else to study. But it was something that I've always been quite interested in, which is why when I found that course, I thought actually I'm interested to know more. And I think I've always been interested in politics because I've just always been curious why the world works, how it works. And I guess it wasn't something I ever found like a scary subject to be interested in. You know, you don't get taught, you know, I didn't get taught politics as like a subject or anything at school or anything like that. But I was just kind of curious when I would see the news or where I would see like stories and just think, why is the world how it is? I really want to figure out how it works. And, you know, for me, the story of politics is actually a part of my testimony, I would say, because I went to uni, was studying international relations. And then as you know, Sam, you study, don't you, like different thoughts and political science theories, and you know, we would study practical things. And funnily enough, one interesting thing we were studying was the Middle East. And I remember it really got me thinking, because I was thinking that one of the things that they were trying to debate was, you know, how can there be peace in the Middle East? And I remember just being curious and thinking, yeah, why? What's the answer? Like, I get that these people talk about religion, but I wasn't a Christian at this point. So I was like, yeah, I get from an outside point of view that they have their religious beliefs, but you know, why is it that deep? Like, why is it so deep for them that there's always this conflict? Surely there's an answer. I would study these kind of theories, and each theory that I would learn, like you'd learn maybe, you know, like a liberalism type mindset or something more conservative. And each one, when it's explained by someone who's passionate, I'd be, that's it. That answers the world. I've got it. But then I would sort of look into it and think, it doesn't, yeah, there's a few bits that I can't quite, you know, get my head around. It doesn't answer everything. Then I would read another theory and be like, no, that's it. It's the opposite, actually. That one is the one that makes sense. But each one I learned, it would always be missing something. And it at that time is when, you know, things were also happening in my personal life that eventually culminated in me becoming a Christian. And I remember when I started reading the Bible, that's when for me I thought, wow, this book makes the world make sense. It makes everything make sense. Like why people do what they do, even, you know, specific conflicts that I was thinking, why does that happen? Why does it never end? It just, everything that the Bible was teaching, it made sense in a way that no other theory could. But so I would say for myself, you know, if it wasn't for my, you know, interest in politics, I maybe wouldn't have had the same kind of, you know, coming to faith as I did. I think a big part of me coming to faith was asking these questions. And, you know, I'm not saying everyone has to have that journey, but I'm saying for me, it's probably why it's a topic that I'm quite passionate about, because I really do think that, you know, politics isn't something that is separate from God. I don't say that to mean that it means what happens in politics has God's approval, or like God would say that's what I want. All I'm saying is it's not like a separate thing that God has.
He doesn't get involved.
Exactly. So it's been interesting hearing everyone's, you know, points of view, and what I want to do now is get into some sort of topics of how politics links with our faith and how we personally feel it does. And you know, I don't have a set agenda. We're not trying to like lead any particular way, but I'm very interested to know what people's views are. So first question I want to ask, and maybe if I ask it to Tanya, I'll ask you first, is can we have political views that are outside of our faith?
That is an interesting question. I suppose the before I answer, what are you trying to find out from this question? I know I'm asking a question, answering a question with a question, but what is the?
It's like a true politician. I know. No, it's a good point. So feel free to interpret this question how you like. But what I'm, I guess, sort of interested in is, can you be a Christian? And that be one part of your life. But then your interests and maybe your activities within politics can be something separate. So can you have like these political views maybe that don't have to tie up with your faith? It can just be a separate.
I see what you're saying.
So for example, you know, I support a football team, but I don't support them because I think, you know, like God's blessing is on that team. As a Christian, I must follow that team. I follow them because I like what they're about. And it's, you know, it doesn't have like a deep rooted link to my faith.
Right. So
would you say it's the same with politics, or can it not have that kind of?
Yeah, I understand what you're asking, and I feel like for me, being a Christian means that every aspect of my life is being filtered through that. So I find it hard to separate even my political views from my faith. And so I feel like for me, my political views will naturally be influenced by my faith, and I will perhaps adhere to a political view that is also in line with my beliefs, if that makes sense. It's not to say, this is the thing about politics, is that you can follow a political party and you can agree with some aspects of them, but you don't necessarily say everything that they stand for I agree with. And that's what I found navigating the political arena, is that you are able to differentiate and decipher, yes, this far and no more. I agree with this aspect of this political party, but I don't agree with that. And I think that, I don't think that there's an expectation for you to agree with everything that they say. I hope I've answered your question, Joel. Is that what you're asking?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
So that's how I have, for the people that are perhaps, anxious with politics and stuff, it's not to say that you agree with everything. You just, for yourself, you become educated with what implications of certain policies and what have you, and you decide for yourself where you stand on certain things. And that's what I would advise, and that's how I'm going about it.
No, thanks, Tanya.
Yeah.
I'll mix up the order a bit of who I'm asking. So Sam, if I ask the same question to you.
Yeah. No, I think similar to Tanya, really. I think like my faith obviously is such a big part of my life, and that affects the things that I believe. So when it comes to like politics, and you're looking at what parties stand for, a lot of things I'm looking for are things that I agree with, and that is shaped by my Christian faith. But yeah, it's like you'll never find
the perfect person.
Yeah, you'll never find the perfect candidate to vote for. I think, and when it comes to the time when you have to put a cross in the box, it's a case of, and sometimes it's picking the best out of a bad bunch. Sometimes I don't really agree with much of anyone here, but this party aligns with more than the other one in terms of what I'm thinking. And I think it's important for Christians to be involved in politics.
Absolutely.
And, it's a case of sometimes you do just kind of have to be like, okay, well, yeah, they're the one that I'm going to vote for. This time round, I agree with more of what they say than the other party. But yeah, I think that definitely sometimes that can be a reason for people like to ignore it completely, and maybe not vote and not have their say. Because they're like, well, I don't agree with everything they say, but you'll never vote for anyone in that case. You might as well start your own party. If you don't agree with anything they say, then you might as well set your own one up and write your own policies out. And
do it, Sam.
Throw your hand over.
And it's
Sam,
interesting.
Sam 2022.
This is just the setup for Sam. But I do really like what you're saying, Sam, because actually it's making me think, where we're called to be a light on the hilltop.
Absolutely.
I think there's two different views, and I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but I think, for some people, the idea of going into politics would mean I'm putting too much focus on something that's not my faith.
Right.
But for other people, there's nothing to say. Like, why? Maybe if you disagree with everything you see out there, maybe that's an opportunity to actually, if you were actively involved, you could share aspects of your faith in a way that would practically potentially benefit your community.
Absolutely.
So it's just a thought that I've got. It's not like telling anyone to do it, but it really makes me think. Sometimes probably we want to shy away from all these things that are of the world, but we're also called to go into the world and be that light and shine. Kano, if I go to you for the same question, so I can repeat if you haven't remembered.
No, I do remember.
Cool.
But before I answer, I just want to jump on something Sam said, where he said you have to cross up for a party. Well, in France, actually, there is an option on every time you need to vote like a blank, like a white vote. It's a white vote, and it would mean that you purposefully say, I actually disagree with everyone, so I'm putting it in like officially.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a good thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't count as much because at the end of the day you still have to have a party that is elected. You can't just have no one because that's the majority. Yeah. But I mean, it's also another way that I think is quite good. I've done it before where I was like, well, there's no one I would vote for, so I'll just put that because that's also for them to take into account that the presentation is not that much in the country. So yeah, interesting. Yeah. But to answer your question, Joel, I think it's so linked. Like, we are spiritual creatures, and then if you're a believer, then everything is ruled by your faith. Now, obviously, like Sam said, there's no perfect party because Jesus is not running for anything. I mean, if Jesus was running, I would definitely vote.
Probably.
Thinking about that, I would definitely.
I'll see what he's about.
You are Boris Johnson.
Correction. I would definitely vote for Jesus, but Jesus is not there. And even if there's a Christian, like, full born again, he might still have some things that I would disagree with because at the end of the day we're all human. So it's like weighing in, all right, these doesn't align with my faith, these aligns with my faith, and we might all have different interpretations of certain issues and both think it's my faith makes me vote that or agree with that or not. And yeah, so for me, it's really weighing in. All right, and then I would say pray. I personally don't go voting without praying before, especially when I'm lost. But even when I'm like, no, I think I'm sure of what I want to vote for. I'm still like, God, lead my vote, and also it's in your hands at the end of the day. Like, what can I do? But you know, so yeah.
No, thanks, Kunal. And obviously, same for you, Ian. So yeah, can your political views be separate from your faith? Sure.
Yeah, I don't think they can. I think, you know, and I'm really agreeing with everyone else in a sense, but I would sort of fairly strongly say that, you know, if your political views on life are different to your supposed faith, then, you know, there's a bit of a dissonance, there's an issue there because, you know, politics is about life and how the country's run and things and values. And so I would say, you know, for me, yes, like everyone has said, my faith informs everything I do. Hopefully every decision I make is being filtered, and the more important the decision, the more I would involve, you know, God in helping me to make that decision. So if I think, you know, politically, you know, I might think, well, you know, what are the values that, or who's standing up for, say, it could be like family values, traditional family values, whatever they might be, certain issues that I'm looking for. And like you said, though, and I think this sort of touches on the point that although as Christians and as people of God, we can't look to the political parties to be the answer to all of our problems and the problems of the world. So we can't expect, you know, oh, this party are going to, you know, transform the world, transform our country, because that's wrong. You know, and so I would only go so far in a sense. And it is important, but I think, you know, clearly we know from our faith and from what Jesus said that, you know, his kingdom is different to the kingdom of the world, and the, you know, the values are very different, and the kind of the type of power is different as well, and the so, you know, I think the heart of the human problem is like the problem of the human heart, and it's only the gospel that changes the heart. So we mustn't look to the politicians to you know, bring all this radical change. It's going to be the people of God and the gospel. But yes, we do of course take a big interest as well in politics.
Absolutely.
I hope that kind of answers a little bit.
Absolutely.
No, definitely. And
Absolutely.
it's really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. I wrote a few sort of summary notes for that same question for myself, but you know, I think it's kind of been covered with what everyone has said. So, you know, I wrote for myself, my argument would be that there's no political view that will ever line up entirely with our faith. I would even go as far to say, as far as they're concerned, it's not their job. I don't think political parties, even if they come from what they would say is a faith base, from what I've seen play out in the world, I don't think any party really ever views it as their job to, you know, be ministers of the gospel.
The kingdom or whatever.
Exactly that. I've always wondered myself, you know, as much as I could criticize politicians, I've always thought, if I was also in the shoes of the prime minister, what would I do if I knew such and such country wants to go to war with my country? How would I deal with that? Because I have a responsibility to protect the citizens. But my own faith, you know, I'm reading things like Jesus would say, turn the other cheek. And, you know, am I twisting the word to be like, no, but he wouldn't mean it in this situation? So I've always thought, you know, as much as I could criticize politicians,
it's a hard job.
If I was in their shoes, as a Christian, it wouldn't be easy for me to make decisions.
Absolutely.
So I don't think it's their job, but I think that aside, it's not, you know, there's no political view that I would say that would line up perfectly with our faith.
Sure.
But as you guys are saying, I do think our faith should guide our political views. Something that, you know, this is my opinion, is that a sort of trend maybe I would say I've noticed is that I think a lot of Christians tend to get very politicized, and I just find that a very interesting
Could
trend.
you break down what that word means?
Yeah, for sure. So for example, like really equating a political view to mean this is the way that a Christian should be.
Yeah.
And I find it I've always just found that interesting, and particularly I see, maybe just because social media makes things more apparent what people's views are.
Right.
I feel like I've noticed more and more people are very, you know, overtly saying, if you really were a believer, you would vote for that person. You would vote for that party.
Right.
I find it interesting as a believer with my understanding of scripture, because like I'm saying, I don't think any party would wholly encapsulate the gospel.
Yeah.
So as much as I could maybe agree to a point and say, yeah, that party may more so represent Christ, for me, I think you cross a line if you're saying they are Christ's representatives on earth. They're like, almost like you're saying, none of them are coming out saying we're ushering in the new kingdom. So
it's so true, and we've seen it. Let's not beat about the bush. It was saying the American politics. It really, this polarizing huge thing, and when you see the polarizing of things, and if you like, the separating of Christians, you know that the enemy is at work. And it's interesting that we've been experiencing that pull to unity of late. And I think, you know, there's this, you know, fight going on in the spiritual realm, but trying to separate folks. But so we saw, and I, you know, I there's a real kind of, you can be deceived, and there's the deception of thinking, just as you were saying, that this political party or person is the answer, is God's answer.
Absolutely.
And I even, you know, I've heard it expressed that, you know, even God would have said, maybe, well, look, that's happening and that's not right, and therefore, sorry, you know, you're not going to succeed in, let's say, a second term with Trump and all the rest of it. And I think, you know, that's a valid argument, because you know, the people appeared to be just saying, you know, Trump is the answer to the future and to the church and everything. But of course, it's Jesus and the church and the gospel that is the answer. And then the polarizing that was going on. And so, I think it was...
Go on, lovely.
I was going to ask a question, so...
No, I was just going to make a comment. It's interesting how if people don't have that discernment of politics, it can be that divisive. I don't think politics in and of itself is bad, but I think the way in which people interpret things, and they become so polarized that it becomes divisive. So I understand. So people that may look at this and think, oh, well, I should just not get involved in politics because this is what it can do. I don't think that's a cop out. Like, it's not a good enough reason to be not involved in politics. But I think it's just having wisdom and honor and love, navigating it. I mean, accepting that there may be people on this planet, even in the church, that have a different political view than I do. But at the same time, what unites us is Christ, and that is the the paramount thing. It's you know, anyway, I don't want to go on too much, but I agree with you.
But just for before the question, just to agree with you, because I'm of the opinion that as believers, it makes me feel that actually our political views would be very fluid and changing based on what we see, because I think that's where the polarization sort of
people stay in their camps.
And then it's like you really want to turn a blind eye to maybe some arguments against the political party that you might be for, but it's also not to say that then because you feel more led to one that you reject the other. It's not to say that, or vice versa. What happened in American politics. I would say, like, as a Christian, it's not to say, well, if you weren't for Trump, then you were for Biden, and actually he represents Christ. Or no, the reason you weren't for Biden is because Trump represents Christ. I think surely as a believer, Jesus is the one that is the solid, and maybe both people, maybe both parties actually represent bits from elements of the faith. But I don't think we would. I'm not saying this to say cool, so actually just never have a political view. But I just think if you're so rigid in your thinking, I would just be of the opinion that you should be cautious.
Right.
That if people are saying, well, what about from this point of view? Are you disagreeing with them because biblically and spiritually that makes sense to disagree? Or are you disagreeing because it just goes against the political view you have? And is that right as a Christian? That would be a question I would just ask us to ask ourselves.
I think, I was going to ask a question, but I kind of know we all think the same. So one thing that I found really interesting is that a lot of time when people get so polarized about political views, and to the point where in the church we've seen people literally almost questioning other people's faith. Like, I wonder if you've not strayed because you don't believe the same. You didn't vote like me. But I'm like, we're all peaking things, like, for example, for one person, a priority might be about the family values, and another person, the priority might be about, I don't know, the refugee crisis and the social care and all these things. And you won't find the ultimate answer about all these things into one political party. So me voting, I'm not saying that's the case, but I would take an example. Me voting differently than Joel because Joel's prioritizing something that God's made him more passionate about, or that resonates more with something for him. Doesn't mean that's it. I don't know who I'm married, because it's like we can't be husband and wife anymore, because this is amazing. This is just incredible. And the same thing within the church with brothers and sisters. No, it just, like we said, there is no Jesus party. Even the Christians party, there would be things that a lot of time I have not really agreed with. And I'm not there to say, well, they can't call themselves Christian party, because otherwise I would fully agree with them. But we all have our priorities. We all choose to put certain things down, like, for example, being saying, well, I'm pro-choice and being against abortion, but then a lot of time those parties, for example, would be more likely to be pro-death penalty. And maybe someone else would look and be thinking, well, how can you think that and like the other thing? It doesn't mean that, one is bad, one is right. It's just we're choosing. When we, when you vote, you make a choice. And to make a choice means also you choosing to not choose other things, if that makes sense.
Well, there's that. Sorry.
I was going to say, interestingly, that, and we're talking about, countries that we have the freedom to choose. Do you know there's huge parts of this world, and I know I'm not being patronising, but when we think about it, even in recent history, where so many have no choice, their world, they have to, and so if you kind of relate what God says about that, it's almost, look, we know the authorities, they could be wicked, they could be evil, but pray in order that as you pray, the environment, I can change the environment.
Absolutely.
God is saying, I can bring a peace where the gospel is preached and all the rest of it. It's interesting. We're almost making these assumptions that, and it's true for us, and it's a very important discussion. I'm not saying, but isn't it interesting? There's big parts of the globe where they've got no choice, no vote.
Yes, so
and
true.
Just making that point. So.
Were you going to say something, Sam? Sorry.
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about the divisions in recent years, even within, Christian, like being a Christian and politics and views and who you believe. And I was kind of thinking, it's kind of that some of that self-inflicted amongst the Christians in the sense of claiming a party as that's the Christian party. Putting that label and saying, oh no, that's because a Christian, that's the party, even though their party has never claimed anything for themselves. But because people have gone and sort of like claimed that for themselves as, oh no, that's the party, that's Christians, we should vote for. And then obviously I think that's kind of, it's caused divisions between, friends, families, sometimes even churches.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
They think, well, I know I'm a Christian, but I don't necessarily agree with that. But because of there's a big majority claiming that, no, this is, we've kind of adopted that party as Christians, that should be the party that you vote for. And I think sometimes it's kind of a little bit self-inflicted, and it's kind of
so
it's not necessarily because the political party is causing any of the division. It's almost the Christians dividing themselves up.
We've made it ours.
We've decided you're the Christian party.
But Ian, as a pastor of a leader of a church, would you say it's right for you to from the culprit as like a leader being, if there's an election, trying to influence people to vote a certain way, or would you just stay there and be like, well, there's obviously an election, let's just pray, but without giving your personal input?
Yes. Obviously, if Sam was up for election,
I
find it difficult not to vote for him.
Sam would just shut down all the tech at church. Add us to ransom.
I think, personally, and I'm learning all the time, even I've not been pastor of Bright City Church for that long, but I think, you would find me sort of expressing Christian views and values on certain issues in life, from the front that would come through. And then so if there's an obvious party that's really gunning for those, then, but no, I think it's actually not my place to try and, coerce or overly influence people to go vote in a certain direction, because people have the freedom. I mean, even Jesus gives everyone the freedom. There's no coercion to even follow him. He says, look, follow me, and this is what you get, and this is what you get if you don't, and but nobody's forced. That's sort of dictatorships and things, but Jesus, even our God is not like that. So I think and maybe maybe I'm guilty, and I'm particularly thinking back now of the Brexit period.
I didn't bring it up.
I was quite. I suppose I was quite strong on the Brexit, and that is my personal view, and so I think I have to be careful about how I express things from the front. But it's a tough one,
It's a tough one.
I appreciate the question.
No, it's a great question, but I like how you answered it truly, and I think it just shows how we're all navigating this thing of politics, and actually, it's just interesting how in the way we ourselves talk about politics, just knowing how to communicate it in a way that doesn't, for example, you being a pastor, or even us being on Unsubscribe, finding ways in which we can share our opinions and not feel like we're coercing anyone. But it's just
there's sharing opinion and saying this is the ultimate truth.
I think it's beautiful how we have grace for each other. One thing I learned, the beautiful thing about this whole polarization thing is when God really honed into me this thing about grace, Tanya, this thing about honor, regardless of whether you disagree or agree with someone, having that, doing it in such a way where you honor someone, if that makes sense, isn't it? I got an offstage amen. Isn't it? I think that's the way in which we go about it. There is going to be a ton of things that we disagree with, but in order for us to walk as one and in unity, is honor. That's for me is what God has been sharing, and how we do that is going to take time. It's going to take work, but
and no judgment as well.
No judgment,
because it's easy to then go on and judge someone because we've heard about, oh my goodness, I can't believe they vote for that, or they believe in that, that's what they're for, and it's easy for us to do that because human natures we're just very flawed, but it's important to remember not to, and for anyone, but especially in the church, because like we said, no one is representing Jesus fully, so They might. If I jump back on what you said, because I didn't mean to. I didn't ask you this question for that reason.
Oh no, it's fine.
But I remember we had different views on it.
Yes.
Obviously, I mean, I'm French.
Well,
So
you're European.
I didn't vote for Brexit because I'm part of it. But yeah, it didn't stop us like being fine on like not judging anyone. Like we just had the conversation to kind of understand as to where the other one's coming from.
Yes.
And no one's tried to change the other one, and it's fine. That's also the beauty of humans.
I mean, we're citizens of heaven.
Yeah.
We're one. We're part of another kingdom, if you like, which is
that's
above the kingdom.
That's
everlasting. But we do have to engage. I was brought to mind the situation where the kind of the authorities came up to Jesus and said, should we pay taxes? It's very, very political sort of thing. And what was he going to say? Some sort of thing. But he said, give me the coin. And he said, whose head is on it? Interestingly, I heard that on that coin, it says, it's one of the Caesars. It says King, Son of God, and priest or something.
Wow.
And Jesus of course said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And so it's full of stuff in that. But there's that honouring in a sense of those in authority.
Absolutely.
While not submitting to, you're not saying you're in charge of my life in every aspect of my life, but I'm going to sort of honour you on a certain level. Does that make sense?
No, completely. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I think that's the next sort of bit that I want to go into. Just before we do, I really like what you said, Tanya, about the grace, because I think regardless of this isn't just about politics, wherever you are doing in your life, for me one of the biggest messages of the gospel is grace. And I think that's something as Christians we need to be even more careful that we're checking our hearts and showing that. Because something that can definitely, I've seen it happen online, and I know for sure it can be a fallout, is you can have an opinion on something, and from what you see you could be right, and then I've seen this happen where then people are like, you see, I knew it, I told you this would happen if you vote that way, now look. That's not gracious at all. And in the world, I think that's why people then get even more polarized and even more hard-hearted. No one likes to be told you're wrong and you're an idiot and that, there's no forgiveness for you, there's no grace. So the only way to defend yourself is to become more hard-hearted and be like, no, I'm not hearing it. So you get even more stuck in your way of thinking, and you're never willing to embrace another point of view. And as Christians, we can be just as guilty of saying, I think this is the way God would want us to vote. Maybe a different outcome happens. So then you bash every single person that voted differently. You say, see, I told you. Now look what you've done. Now look at what the situation we've got. Regardless of what your view is, I'll say, where's the grace? That you can be right about something in life, but it doesn't mean that then you have the authority to lord it over everyone and tell them they're wrong. And because without grace, life is hopeless for all of us.
I think when we make politics like almost to the level of God, we miss the point, if that makes sense.
Or both sometimes.
Because like what Canel was saying about how people have said, if someone's political view is different, are you even a Christian? Like, whoa, I've done that. I'm not going to lie to you. I've done that before, and I was like, Tanya, how are you able to decide someone's relationship with God based upon what they voted for? That's not God. And also, I have to say, perhaps I may have contributed to this in my own ways. When going back to last year with the whole political uprising, it was it was all over the place. But one thing that my heart's cry was like, we're doing this on a public platform. Christians are in the comment section, against each other. And I thought, we're missing the point here, because here are non-believers, people that don't know Christ, and this is how we're representing ourselves, and they're watching us tear each other apart. I would be like, I don't want to get anywhere near Christians, so we just have to be very careful, in line with the grace thing, about how we conduct ourselves, because look, let's face it, politics, if I vote for who, someone's soul's at stake. The way we conduct ourselves, that can determine whether they choose to follow Christ. So let's not make politics an idol. Let's not make politics a thing that would be so divisive that someone can't even find Christ.
And on that, let's not be unaware of the enemy's schemes.
This is it.
You know, we've been talking about it in church, haven't we, on that series? You know, he's loving this.
Yeah.
Getting the separated and causing the offence and the division. You know, we know who's at work. And let's not be ignorant. And let's say, no, that's not going to happen to me.
Exactly.
I'm going to move in grace. I'm going to move in love.
Well, the Bible says that, like, Jesus says that this is when, I'm paraphrasing, but like the world will see him through the believers' unity. And when we are not united, this is what they see as well. Well, even the Christians don't agree on blah blah blah.
Exactly.
We also, you know, as well, Jesus said, "A kingdom that stands against itself, divided against itself, will not stand. It will fall apart." So, you know, I think Jesus has told us, you know, that despite things that could cause division, just be very careful, because, you know, if you're claiming to all be from one kingdom but you're against each other, how could it even stand up? What I would say before I move on to the next question just quickly is I do think that having an idea of what's going on politically is a good, it can be useful for you to know sort of what's going on from a spiritual point of view. Luke 21:9 is, you know, where Jesus is talking about, you know, you'll hear of wars and you'll hear of this and that. It's a sign that, you know, he's saying the end is not right now, but it's, you know, to look out for the signs. And I think there's a lot to be said for just at least being aware of what's going on politically to know where we're at spiritually. Within that verse, so he's saying don't be afraid, and I think that's also a key thing, because the way politics is presented is in a very fearful and fear-based way, and I think as believers we're not immune from getting wrapped up in it, and it can really weigh us down. But you know, the Bible constantly keeps telling us to submit all to God. You know, seek first his kingdom, all else will be given to us. We're meant to trust God. And so even Jesus was saying, these things will happen. You will hear of uprisings, you will hear of wars, there will be famines, there could be plagues, anything, but don't be afraid. And I think that's a key thing for sure. But what I want to ask now is a question that I think is you know, quite a deep question really. So I'm just gonna put it out there for us to debate, not necessarily pick on you one by one. I'm going to share some verses first, but the question is, if God puts governments in place, then does that mean we just accept the governments that we have? And I'm going to put up two verses that I think, you know, would just be interesting to debate. So the first one is from the book of Romans, chapter 13, verses 1 to 2, and it says, everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against God. Is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. So that's the first verse, you know, in the New Testament, almost saying, you know, any government institution or any authority that's been put there by God, and you'll actually be punished if you rebel against them.
Wow.
I also want to read from the book of 1 Samuel, so chapter 8, verses 5 to 9, and it says, look, they told him, you are now old and your sons are not like you. Give us a king to judge us like all the other nations have. Samuel was displeased with their request and went to the Lord for guidance. Do everything they say to you, the Lord replied, for they are rejecting me, not you. They don't want me to be their king any longer. Ever since I brought them from Egypt, they have continually abandoned me and followed other gods. And now they're giving you the same treatment. Do as they ask, but solemnly warn them about the way a king will reign over them. And so I wanted to bring that one up as well. So to put that into context, that's in the book of 1 Samuel, and basically God's people were basically saying to the prophet Samuel, we just want a king, because until then they weren't ruled by kings, and they were saying, well, all these other nations, they have these leaders, these kings, just let us have it. And you can kind of see that God's almost like, they're rejecting me. It's not personal to you, Sam, but you know, I've been leading them this whole time. He's even given a reminder, like, I took them out of Egypt, I took them out of slavery, but this is what they want. So if that's what they want, I will give it to them, but just remind them, just let them know that you know, there's a way that a king will be. And I find that interesting because there's kind of like a dilemma of, you know, we're told to submit to authorities, but that bit there makes me think, you know, maybe that wasn't always God's initial or perfect plan for us. Like, what he would rather is that we all submit to him because he knows the way. Like, he, you know, will be like what he did for the Israelites, take them out of slavery. That's what God can do for us. But, you know, I think our human nature can't help to look to other situations and be like, no, we'd rather just have this and that. But you end up dealing with the consequences of that. So I just want to put that, with that context in mind, that there's almost sort of this like battle going on of like, do we just obey the authorities, or are the authorities, you know, bad for us? How do we navigate that? Anyone can feel free to jump in, but yeah, just if the Bible's telling us that God put these governments in place, does that mean that we just accept any government that is ruling over us?
Wow.
I think we can see through Scripture, you know, that in the sovereign will of God, he provides leadership, obviously, to his people, but even in kingdoms and things to bring order, to bring control, you know, to bring boundaries, and even says, you know, it's almost like a schoolmaster, and you know, if you do wrong, you'll be punished. It's fairly simple type of thing on a very basic level, and even bringing in sort of other sort of kingdoms to discipline nations and kingdoms who have really rebelled against him. So there's that kind of level, and so there's a submitting in one sense to, you know, the rules and regulations and things, and yet when they absolutely come against God's own rules and laws, then, you know, the people are to make that right choice where God's law is over and above. I'll give you an example where you know, in Germany, Nazi Germany, you know, when it was about sort of giving up Jews to be murdered, you know, there were Christians who said, no, I'm going to, you know, that is against God, that is going to be murder, that is going to be awful, that is, and they went against, and now, you know, they're celebrated as the righteous Gentiles. And there were, of course, many who didn't, and many who succumbed and just were. So I think, you know, there's a place to submit, and generally, you know, it's yes, we submit to the authorities, but there are times when we stand up and say no, and it's making that right choice. When is the time to say I'm not submitted to that? You know, is it no? I'm not having the vaccine. No, no way.
There we go.
We won't debate on the vaccine, but it could be that, you know, what about if they say, right, you know, there's no more sharing of the gospel in the church or on the street? You know, am I going to stand up and say, no, I'm going to share the gospel? And even though I might be arrested, or it could be lots of other issues, there's a certain...
It's like when the law of man is above the law of God.
Yeah.
That's
contradicting the law of God.
That's when there's an issue. But also that just makes me think, your question and what's there is, in an ideal world, after the fall and, you know, like things happened, we'd all believe. We would all believe, so we would all be voting or doing things because we're all believing. But the case is it's not like we are the minority. So whoever's going to be elected in our country is going to be elected majoritarily
by the majority.
By the majority that is not a believer and that is not believing in Jesus. So there's not going to be the answer anyway. So I think it's one of the law of man is sometimes not contradicting the law of God, and sometimes it can work within the law of God, but sometimes it's completely opposite of what God wants and God's will, and that's when we have to start thinking, well, actually, this is just this is not okay. And for me that would be the breaking point. I would think is when that's actually not what God wants at all, and then there's all things where you navigate it and you're like, it's fine, it's not against it, and we can still work it.
If I may, I mean, I'm not a terrible Bible scholar like that. Sorry,
We
I'm
might
not.
have to
I'm,
ask you to leave then. You didn't disclose that before this episode.
I'm not a Bible scholar, but if I may comment to the context in which Paul was talking about, this is Romans. These are Christians in Rome, and they have a whole different political system that he was navigating and advising the believers there. Then, if we look at the chapter before, he's talking about the markings of a true Christian and I feel like Paul, I think it's Paul who wrote the book, was commenting, was speaking and addressing perhaps the heart posture. I gather he was addressing perhaps a sort of uprising that may have happened amongst the believers, which would have dishonored the name of Christ, because it's kind of this thing where perhaps Christians were kind of becoming these rebel groups as opposed to followers of Christ. And don't quote me, but I think he's addressing that. And towards the end of that section, he then goes on to mention about, here we go, taxes. And that is, again, is something to do with the political setup and what was going on in that region. I mean, the history of that particular time is very fascinating. And, you know, when Jesus came, there was similar sort of things of like, Jesus has come, he's the king who's going to deliver us from these Roman rule. And, you know, Peter was ready. He was one of the rebels, ready and willing with a knife in his hand to cut down anyone. But Jesus reminded us that the kingdom that he was coming to establish was one that is everlasting, like we said earlier in this episode. But so to come back to what I was saying, I feel like Paul was addressing heart posture. As Christians, I don't think it's a proper and a good representation of Christ if we're rebels and anarchy. I don't think God stands with that. But in the same breath, I think we're talking about the verse from Samuel. I don't even know if this related to that, but I wanted to say this about the time between Daniel and a few other people that God raised. I don't know what phase of time. When the children of Israel had been put into exile, there were a number of different kings, some good, some bad, that were like Babylonian kings that God used for his purpose. So in that, it shows me God can do what he likes. I don't care who it is. He can use a donkey to do his will, ultimately. So in as much as we are to pray for our political, I know I'm going a bit of a tangent, in as much as we are to pray for our political rulers and authorities, it's not to say, even if there's an awful, evil king, that God is like, well, he doesn't stand with me, so I'm not going to use him. No. Like somewhere in Proverbs, God is in control. Somewhere in Proverbs it says that he holds the king's hearts in his hand. He leads it where he wants them to go. So that's my take on
Romans 8:28 says like all things work to good.
Listen,
God, so you can use any situation. It's, you know, to give a bit more of the story of Samuel, which is exactly, you know, linked to what you're saying, is we read as we go along with Samuel that Saul was put in place by God, but then eventually turned away, and like his heart was hard, and in the end, then he was replaced by King David, and God always had a way of making good out of a situation, but we don't. But
and Saul he's allowed things as well to happen.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like Saul, I think, you know, with all the leaders, God may put them in place, but then we choose as individuals how much we choose to follow God. And I love what you're saying about Jesus, because I had this in my notes, and I think it's so important. Is you're right. Jesus came like proclaiming a new kingdom. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Ian, but my understanding is that a lot of the Jews that were following him at the time, because, you know, we read there's instances where Jesus had thousands of people following him. Like, we can't be confused to think Jesus had these 12 friends. He had thousands of people, but we start seeing that as people fall away, it's because they were thinking, well, wait a minute, like, where's this kingdom you're bringing? And exactly what you're saying, they were under an oppressive Roman regime. And I think these people thought, well, yeah, he's talking about the new kingdom. Like, he's our leader. He's who we're expecting. When's the fight happening? But Jesus was saying, trying to show them, it's not about that. What I'm bringing is something far greater than any earthly kingdom. And as believers, I think that's so important for us to remember. And it gives us so much peace. Because we can see what's going on in the world. We can pray for our leaders. we can sort of engage so that we can be the light. But when we get disheartened, we can remind ourselves this isn't the only thing. Jesus showed us there's this bigger kingdom that we're a part of, and this world is gonna do what it does. And you know, for those of us that have read the Bible, we realize that well, no matter what happens on this earth, at some point it's going to end anyway. So it's a tricky one to navigate sometimes. But you know, I find myself thinking, well, I don't want to detach myself from reality. But at the same time, as much as things can dishearten me, can put fear in me, can put anger in me, it was always going to happen at the end of the day.
I think. Sorry.
No, go.
I think one thing also that's important is, you know, like that verse that says that you shared that says that God has put the people in authority. It doesn't always mean, to my understanding, that it means He's literally just looked and been like, you put there, but He allows things to happen, and it's not always, you know, for example, if we take the story of Job. Things happened because God allowed it to happen. Was it coming from Him first? It didn't, but He allowed things to happen, and then He worked for His glory at the end to be revealed and to happen. And I feel like it's the same thing with, sometimes we may look and be thinking, wait, are they actually telling me that leader somewhere, like blah blah, is actually God that put them there? It might not be exactly like we think it means, but He's allowed it to happen, and He'll work it like Tanya said. And also, if we put it back in perspective of Revelations and the Apocalypse, well, that's the French word, the Revelations, that's also things will happen that are not nice and not good, but it has to happen for His glory to be glorified at the end of it. And we might think is that we're not at the end there where He's come back, but the closest we're going to be towards the end, the closest we'll be thinking, how on earth did He put someone like that ruling over us? But he's made it allowed so that He can be revealed
in His perfect will.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was brought to mind as you were sharing there the Timothy scripture where it says, although kings and all those in authority, He says, I urge you first of all, you know, and it's not, you know, protest, you know, stand up against, you know, go and march and sort of say, well, we can't rebel. Okay. No, it's I urge you first of all, pray for all those in authority and kings over you, you know, that this will happen. So it's kind of saying we look to God, don't we? We look to God and we say, Lord, you are able, you can do this, you can do that. We trust in you, we look to you, and He's going to work it out. You know, we're not looking, yes, we do vote and we take an interest, but all of our hope is not in the politicians.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow.
Sam, I've got a question for you. What would be your advice? You know, there might be people watching that are, you know, just have no interest in or don't know where to start in terms of looking at politics. And you know, you were saying for you, it's always been quite an interest. Yeah. So, what would be your advice to anyone that's maybe like fearful of engaging with the topic? You know, especially from a Christian point of view.
I think the first thing that people need to do is maybe like find some information. Like maybe the reason that you may be scared or shying away from it is because you don't have the information. But there are places where it is available. You know, you can go onto in the UK, you can go on the party websites and you can download. You know, and they quite often will shrink it down into like smaller statements in terms of what they believe in this area and what they plan to do. So I think it's more a case of on a practical level, like being informed, because it's then less scary. Like when you know the information, it's less scary. But yeah, I think definitely like when you shy away from it and you don't, maybe because you are scared and you just think I'm not going to get involved because I'm a bit scared of it and it's a bit overwhelming. But definitely finding out some information for yourself and putting some information out in front of you and looking, okay, you know, what do these people believe? And then when you've got that information, then you can take that and you can pray. As Christians, we can then take that information. We can pray and ask God how that sits, and ask Him to reveal, you know, how that sits in your spirit when you read this information. And so, I think definitely on a practical level, it's like we have the ability and we have the technology around us that we can inform ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we can look things up. I don't think the excuse of kind of like, oh, I didn't know is like as valid now, because it's not. The information is so readily available and it's so easy. You can find it in seconds when you're going online. As long as you're going to credible places to find it.
If I could just coming off of Sam's point, I think we talked a lot about big topics in politics, like race and whatever else we may have touched on, but politics, like you said, is everyday life. So on a local level, things like the bus system, that's political. That's a political issue. Recycling, that's a political issue. Whether the people have come to pick up your bins on time, you can talk to your local councillors. It's not to say like, being involved in politics is that you're getting involved in debates about immigration and all these huge things. Although they're important, let's not be afraid to talk about it, because like we said, at the end of the day, it affects our everyday life. And what helps me to realize I'm involved in politics, whether I know it or not, is realizing that it's in everyday life, and things like homelessness and everything that I've been able, schools, exactly, everything is affected by that. So it's just get involved and know where to look. I mean, is it the LBC? They have great. Is it LBC? That radio show. I love it. They have great discussions and debates. You hear people from all walks of life having an opinion, talking about it. That is what it's supposed to be.
And really, really encouraging what you're saying, because I know, like yourself, Pastor Ian, there's so many practical things that Bright City have been involved in within the community and worked with the council. But it comes from our faith. It comes from as believers thinking, well, I'm seeing things in the community, my community, that I don't agree with, and that I don't believe Jesus would be happy with. Imagine, I don't think Jesus would be in Ashford and think, well, I don't really care that these families don't eat, or that this person has to sleep on the street. And I think it's, like you're saying, such a valid point, that that's not thinking on necessarily a global scale or something that seems unachievable. At a local level, as the church, we can make such change and spread the gospel at the same time.
And there's, I think it's on Instagram. It's called Simple Politics.
Yes.
That's good. They break it down really well.
So if you're flicking through Instagram, they'll put a picture up, and it might have like 3 bullet points on it of
really
the topics of the day, whether they break down data in COVID cases and everything. But it's literally, if you're scrolling through Instagram, you see it's just literally 4 bullet points a couple of times a day, and they break everything down into like a sentence or 2. So even if you're looking for something just
digestible,
something where you can just be like, 2 sentences, I understand a little bit more about what's happening with that area, then they break everything down, and it's a great way to get started.
I would say also, like, this is Unsubscribe, and Unsubscribe, when we say up, we even chose that name because we wanted to go against just, that's what we've always done in the church, or that's what everyone thinks I'm doing it, and be more critical as well. And I think for that, I would encourage everyone to be more critical. Do we vote because we've always been told, well, if you're a Christian, you have to vote for that party, but we've never really questioned it. I would say the first step would be to actually question it, not question the people that have told you that, but question the reason why you are doing it yourself and following it and voting for that, and just really, like Sam said, educate yourself as well on what they do, and then you may not change your voting or your beliefs or whatever, but at least it will come from a genuine place, and not just, well, I guess that's what you have to do, or you've heard people say things but you've not made a personal conscious decision. So I think that's also a practical thing, is to be sure as well of where you stand, and that might not mean all the time that you will be like the best at knowing the whole thing, but at least it will be a personal thing.
I think, let's not forget, it's the political sort of activation of Christians that brought an end to slavery. That brought education to the masses, schools. That brought hospitals to the masses and things. That's all Christians moving in the life and political field.
Even the food
and there's so much other stuff.
Food banks are usually run by Christian churches.
No, so true. Well, I think that's such an encouraging point to end on. I know we've gone slightly over, but I just want to say I really appreciate each one of you for joining on this conversation.
Thank
I
you.
hope that everyone watching has enjoyed it as well. And, you know, like we're saying, it's not, the agenda here has not been to say this is how you must think, how you mustn't think. But I think we'd all agree what we kind of have a consensus in is you should at least question in every aspect of life, you know, where does my faith lead me in this area and that area? And, you know, as we've just finished with, there's so many elements of our community we can get involved in, whether big or small, that I think really in a practical way show the love of Christ, spread the gospel in a practical way. And, you know, I would encourage each one of you to maybe, you know, just pray about it and say, you know, Lord, is there any area that you would want me to serve in more, to serve my community? As always, if there's any questions, feel free to let us know, you know, in the comments or contact us via the social medias. Thanks again for joining, and we will be back, I assume, in 2 weeks time. So have a great week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
God bless.